I pulled out my phone and opened the projector app without saying a word. The birthday cake sat untouched on the table, 43 candles melting into the frosting my best friend Victoria had insisted on making from scratch. Everyone in the banquet hall wore their finest clothes, champagne glasses raised for the toast that would never come. My fiancé Daniel stood beside Victoria near the DJ booth, his hand resting on the small of her back in a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times, but never understood until 3 hours ago when I'd walked into the storage room looking for extra napkins. The projector hummed to life. I didn't announce what I was doing. I simply connected my phone and let the first image fill the white screen behind the dessert table. Victoria's laugh died mid-sound. The photograph showed her pressed against the wall of our apartment building's stairwell, Daniel's face buried in her neck, her fingers tangled in his hair. The timestamp read 2 weeks ago, 11:47 p.m, the night Daniel told me he'd gone to help his mother with her computer. "Amelia, wait!" Daniel's voice cut through the sudden silence. I swiped to the next photo. Same location, different angle. Victoria's lipstick, the distinctive burgundy shade she wore exclusively, smeared across Daniel's collar. I had the physical shirt at home, hidden in a box under my bed alongside 3 months of evidence I'd been collecting since the strange perfume smell first appeared on his jacket. My mother gasped from her seat near the front. Daniel's father set down his champagne glass with a sharp click against the marble table. "These are edited," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "Someone's trying to sabotage Amelia's engagement. We need to..." I swiped again. A screenshot of text messages, enlarged so every word was legible from across the room. Victoria to Daniel. "She's working late again. Come over. I'm wearing that black thing you like." Daniel's response, "Give me 20 minutes. Love you." The date, last Tuesday. The same evening I'd told Daniel I had to finish a presentation for my promotion review. "This is fake," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was staring at the screen with the expression of a man watching his entire life collapse in real time. "Someone hacked my phone. Baby, you have to believe me." I said nothing. I swiped again. A video this time, silent footage from the security camera I'd installed in my own bedroom after finding a hotel receipt in Victoria's purse during our supposed girls' weekend last month. The receipt was from a hotel 3 blocks from our apartment, dated on a Thursday afternoon when I'd been at work. The video showed Daniel and Victoria entering my bedroom, laughing, his hands already pulling at her dress. Someone's chair scraped against the floor. Daniel's mother stood abruptly, her face pale. She looked at her son, then at Victoria, then walked out of the banquet hall without a word. "How long?" My voice was steady, clinical. I felt nothing, no anger or pain, just a distant curiosity about how they would answer. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. Her mascara had started running, creating dark tracks down her carefully contoured cheeks. "It's not what you think." 40 months, I said. I swiped to a calendar I'd created, marking every instance I could verify through receipts, messages, security footage, and witness accounts. Red dots covered the screen like a rash. "Your anniversary was actually 1 month before our engagement. He proposed to me using the money he'd saved for your Christmas present. You helped him pick the ring." Victoria's face crumpled. Not from remorse, I realised, but from the humiliation of exposure. She'd enjoyed the secret, the thrill of sitting across from me during Sunday brunch and knowing she'd been with my fiancé hours earlier. The shame of public revelation was different from the guilt of the act itself. "This is insane," Daniel said, but he was backing toward the door. His best man, his brother Jeffrey, blocked his path with crossed arms. "Let him leave," I said to Jeffrey. "I don't need him to stay." I swiped to the final image, a legal document, a screenshot of the consultation confirmation from the law firm handling my breach of promise lawsuit. The number at the bottom, The estimated settlement based on Daniel's family's assets and the documented evidence of infidelity was large enough that several people in the room audibly gasped. "You can't sue me for breaking up with you," Daniel said, his voice rising to a pitch I'd never heard before. "That's not how this works." "You're right," I said, "but I can sue you for fraud. The joint savings account you convinced me to open 6 months ago. The one where I deposited my inheritance from my grandmother. You withdrew $40,000 last week to put a down payment on a condo for Victoria." The room erupted. My father was on his feet, his face red. Daniel's aunt was crying. Victoria's mother stood frozen near the gift table, staring at her daughter with an expression of absolute devastation. I disconnected my phone and slipped it into my clutch. The projector screen went dark. "The wedding is cancelled," I said, addressing the room at large rather than Daniel or Victoria specifically. "Gifts can be returned starting Monday. I've already contacted the vendors. Most will be providing partial refunds, which I'll be distributing to everyone who contributed." "Amelia, please," Victoria whispered. She'd always been the dramatic one, prone to tears and grand gestures. "We need to talk about this privately." "We don't," I said. "You're no longer welcome in my life. The lease on our apartment is in my name, Daniel. You have until Friday to remove your belongings. Anything left after that becomes property of the estate." I'd rehearsed this speech 1,000 times in the 3 weeks since I discovered the affair, but I'd never imagined I'd deliver it at my own engagement party. The original plan had been to confront them privately, to give Daniel a chance to confess, to see if Victoria would show even a shred of genuine remorse. But then, this morning, while setting up for the party, I'd overheard them in the venue's back hallway. "Just a few more months," Victoria had been saying. "Once you're married, we can—" "She'll never suspect," Daniel had replied. "And with her salary increase, we'll be set. She's already talking about putting me on her insurance. Her retirement account is—" That's when I'd understood. This wasn't about love or passion or any of the romantic narratives I tried to construct to make sense of the betrayal. This was about money, my money. The promotion I'd worked 70-hour weeks to earn. The inheritance from the grandmother who'd raised me after my parents divorced. The life insurance policy from my father's company, where I was listed as a beneficiary worth $3 million. Daniel had never loved me. He'd seen an opportunity, and Victoria, beautiful, charismatic Victoria, who'd never held a job longer than 8 months and was living in her parents' basement at 32, had been willing to share in the profits. The realization had been oddly freeing. It wasn't about my inadequacy or failure. It was about their greed, their moral bankruptcy, their willingness to destroy someone's life for financial gain. So I changed the plan. No private confrontation, no opportunity for lies or manipulation, just evidence displayed publicly with witnesses who could never be gaslit into doubting what they'd seen. "You're making a mistake," Daniel said. He was trying to sound authoritative, to reclaim some measure of control, but his hands were shaking. "We can fix this. Let's go somewhere quiet and talk this through like adults." "No," I said simply. The single syllable seemed to deflate him. He looked at Victoria, who was sobbing into her hands, mascara and foundation smearing across her fingers. He looked at the crowd of friends and family members, at the faces that ranged from shocked to disgusted to grimly satisfied. He looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw him clearly. Not the charming man who'd pursued me with flowers and poetry, not the supportive partner who'd encouraged my career, but a con artist who'd chosen the wrong mark. "I loved you," he said, and it might have even been partially true in whatever limited way someone like him understood love. "I know," I said. "That's what made this possible." I walked out of the banquet hall with my head high, my spine straight, my clutch tucked under my arm. Behind me, the party dissolved into chaos. Voices rose in accusation and defense. Someone was crying loudly. Victoria's mother, probably, or Daniel's younger sister, who'd helped plan the engagement party. My own mother called my name, but I didn't turn around. The night air was cold against my skin. I'd chosen a sleeveless dress for the party, ice blue silk that Victoria had helped me pick out during a shopping trip, where she'd also tried on bridesmaid dresses. She'd suggested the blue. "It matches your eyes," she'd said. "Daniel won't be able to look away." I wondered if she'd laughed about that later, in bed with him, mocking my naivety. My phone buzzed. A text from Jeffrey, Daniel's brother. "That took guts. I'm sorry he did this to you. For what it's worth, I always liked you better than him." Then one from my cousin Rachel. "OMG, I always thought Victoria was sketchy, but I had no idea. You're a queen." Then my mother. "Come home. We need to talk about what happens next." I deleted them all and opened my banking app instead. The joint account showed a balance of $63. Daniel had indeed withdrawn the $40,000. But what he didn't know was that I documented every deposit, every contribution, every instance where he'd suggested I add money for our future together. My lawyer had assured me the fraud case was airtight. A car pulled up to the curb. Not an Uber. I'd arranged for a car service, planning ahead for this moment. The driver opened the door without speaking, and I slid into the back seat. "Where to?" he asked. I gave him an address across town. Not my apartment, where Daniel's keys still worked and where every room held memories I needed to dismantle. Not my parents' house, where I'd have to explain and re-explain and endure the exhausting sympathy of people who meant well but couldn't understand. Instead, I'd rented a furnished studio apartment 3 weeks ago under a corporate lease. Neutral walls, anonymous furniture, no history. I'd already moved most of my important documents there, along with a suitcase of clothes and toiletries. Tonight would be my first night sleeping there, but it wouldn't be temporary. I'd already given notice on the apartment I'd shared with Daniel. The lease was up in 2 months, and I had no intention of renewing. The city passed by the window in a blur of lights. Wednesday night, almost 11 o'clock, and people were still out. Couples walking hand in hand, groups of friends laughing outside bars, a man walking his dog past closed storefronts. Normal lives untouched by betrayal, or at least untouched by this particular betrayal. My phone buzzed again. Daniel this time. "You've ruined everything. My family will never speak to me again. Victoria's parents are threatening to kick her out. You didn't have to do it like this. You could have been decent about it." I stared at the message for a long moment, then blocked his number. Another text from Victoria. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I am. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened, and then it kept happening, and I didn't know how to stop." I blocked her too. The driver pulled up outside the studio building. "You need help with anything?" he asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "No," I said. "Thank you." The studio was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Clean, sparse, waiting. I locked the door behind me and set my clutch on the kitchen counter. The engagement ring was still on my finger. 3 carats, princess cut, set in platinum. Daniel had proposed on a beach at sunset, the whole scene photographed by a random tourist who turned out to be a professional photographer he'd hired. The photos had gotten 2,000 likes on social media. I twisted the ring off my finger and dropped it into a Ziploc bag. Evidence for the lawsuit. My lawyer had been very clear about preserving everything. My phone buzzed one more time. I almost ignored it, but the name on the screen made me pause. Emma Richardson, the senior partner at the firm where I worked. "Heard about tonight through the grapevine. Take whatever time you need. Your position is secure. Also, my divorce attorney is the best in the city. I'm sending you her contact information." I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at that message for a long time. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd been terrified that this would impact my career, that the drama would make me seem unstable or unprofessional. But Emma understood. She was 56, divorced twice, and had once told me during a late-night work session that the only mistake she'd ever made was waiting too long to leave. "Thank you," I typed back. "I appreciate it more than you know." The apartment was silent except for the distant hum of traffic. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had seemed so full of promise when Daniel and I first moved here together 4 years ago. We'd arrived with everything we owned packed into a rental truck, sleeping on an air mattress for the first month until we could afford furniture. I'd gotten my first real job 2 weeks later. He'd spent 6 months finding himself before landing a position at his father's company, a middle management role that paid well but required minimal effort. I'd thought we were building something together, partnership, mutual support, a future where we'd both contribute and benefit equally. But the reality had been different. I'd paid 70% of the rent because I earned more. I'd bought all the furniture because he was saving for the engagement ring. I'd covered groceries, utilities, date nights, vacations, and when I'd mentioned it, suggested we balance things more fairly, he'd gotten hurt and defensive. "I thought we were a team," he'd said. "I thought you loved me enough that money didn't matter." I had loved him, but love, I now understood, shouldn't require financial exploitation to survive. My phone stayed silent for the rest of the night. I unpacked my suitcase, hanging clothes in the small closet and arranging toiletries in the bathroom. The studio came with basic kitchen supplies, and I made myself tea with the electric kettle, sitting at the tiny dining table and watching steam rise from the cup. There was no satisfaction in what I'd done, no triumphant vindication, just a hollow sense of necessity, like amputating a diseased limb. The relationship was over. The friendship was over. The version of myself who'd believed in their innocence was gone, and I couldn't grieve for her because she had been built on lies. But I wasn't broken. That was the part that surprised me most. I'd expected devastation, trauma, the kind of heartbreak that would leave me unable to function. Instead, I felt clear-headed and purposeful. I had a plan: finalise the legal proceedings, sell any shared property, complete the promotion I'd been working toward, and build a life that belonged entirely to me. My phone buzzed with an email notification. The law firm confirming our meeting for Monday morning. They had reviewed the evidence I'd provided and were confident about the case. The email outlined potential outcomes: full restitution of the stolen funds, compensation for emotional distress, penalties for fraud. The total could reach 6 figures depending on how the court ruled. I didn't want the money for revenge. I wanted it because it was mine, earned through years of work and sacrifice, and they'd taken it through deception. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about restoration. Another email arrived, this one from the wedding venue. The cancellation had been processed. Most of the deposit would be refunded since I'd caught the breach of contract clause when Daniel's infidelity could be documented. The wedding planner had attached a personal note. "I've been in this business 20 years. You did the right thing. I've seen too many people go through with weddings they knew were mistakes. Wishing you all the best." The testimonials from strangers were oddly comforting. They confirmed that I wasn't overreacting, that my response was proportional to the betrayal, that other people would have done the same, or wished they had. Sleep came easier than expected. I'd thought I'd lie awake replaying the evening, but instead I fell into a dreamless void and woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. Thursday morning. I had 4 more vacation days scheduled for the honeymoon that would never happen. I could spend them here, in this neutral space, building routines that belonged to my new life. I made coffee and opened my laptop. The first task was practical: changing passwords on every shared account. Banking, streaming services, cloud storage, email. Daniel had known most of them, and I couldn't risk him accessing anything out of spite or desperation. Each changed password felt like closing a door, sealing off another point of connection. Then I tackled social media. Our relationship had been documented extensively. Couple photos, vacation snapshots, anniversary posts. I downloaded everything for legal purposes, then deleted every image that included Daniel. The gaps in my timeline were obvious, holes where a relationship used to be, but I left them, empty rather than trying to fill them with explanations. The engagement announcement had gotten 300 comments, most of them congratulatory, some from people I barely remembered. I deleted the post without reading them. Whatever goodwill those comments represented, it was based on a fiction. My phone started ringing around noon. My mother, my sister, 3 different friends, 2 cousins. I let them all go to voicemail. Eventually, I'd have to talk to them, but not today. Today, I needed silence and solitude, and the space to process without performing grief or strength for an audience. One call I did answer. My grandmother's lawyer, returning a message I'd left last week, asking about the inheritance and whether Daniel had any legal claim to it. The answer was reassuring. The money had been left to me specifically, with no provisions for spouses or partners, and since we'd never married, Daniel had no right to any portion of it. However, the lawyer said carefully, if he can prove you agreed to use the funds jointly or made promises about shared ownership, he might have grounds for a civil suit. I have documentation that I never agreed to that, I said. In fact, I have text messages where he suggests we keep our finances separate until after the wedding. Perfect. Save those. You're doing everything right. By evening, the studio felt less like a temporary shelter and more like a possibility. I ordered takeout from a Thai place down the street and ate it sitting on the floor, laptop balanced on my knees, drafting emails to vendors and guests. The messages were brief and professional. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding has been cancelled. We appreciate your understanding during this difficult time. I didn't explain, I didn't apologise. I didn't offer details that would invite questions or gossip. The facts were simple, there would be no wedding. Everything else was private. Friday morning brought a text from Jeffrey. Daniel came by the house to get his stuff. He's staying with our parents. He's telling everyone you overreacted and that the photos were taken out of context. Just thought you should know. Let him tell whatever story he needs, I replied. The evidence speaks for itself. He's also saying Victoria pursued him, and he was trying to end it, but didn't know how. I laughed out loud at that, a sharp bark of sound in the quiet apartment. Of course he was rewriting the narrative, positioning himself as the victim or the helpless participant. Men, like Daniel, always did. They couldn't accept responsibility for their choices, so they constructed elaborate justifications where they were swept along by circumstances or misunderstood by cruel partners who refused to forgive. That's between him and his conscience, I wrote back. I'm done. The truth was, I didn't care anymore what Daniel said or thought or felt. He'd become irrelevant to me the moment I discovered the affair. All the time I'd spent analysing our relationship, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong or how I could have prevented this, had been wasted energy. The fault wasn't mine. It was his, and Victoria's, and no amount of explanation or justification would change that fundamental reality. Saturday, I spent organising the studio, transforming it from a generic rental into something that felt like mine. I bought plants from a farmer's market, hung curtains I'd been saving for years, arranged books on the small shelf by the window. Each choice was deliberate, made without consulting anyone else's preferences or considering whether it matched some shared aesthetic. This was my space, mine alone, and the freedom of that was intoxicating. Sunday morning, my sister showed up unannounced. I heard her knocking and almost didn't answer, but she called through the door. I know you're in there. Mom told me about the studio. Let me in or I'm calling the landlord. I opened the door. Melissa stood in the hallway holding 2 coffee cups and a bag of pastries. You look terrible, she said. Good morning to you too. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She entered slowly, taking in the space with the critical eye of someone who'd helped me move 6 times in the last decade. "It's cute," she said finally. "Very you, without any of Daniel's awful minimalist nonsense." I took one of the coffee cups. "What do you want?" "To make sure you're okay? To tell you that what you did took guts? To see if you need anything?" She set the pastries on the counter. "Also, to tell you that Victoria showed up at Mum's house yesterday crying and saying she wanted to explain." "What did Mum do?" "Closed the door in her face." Melissa smiled grimly. "I've never been prouder of her." We sat on the floor and drank coffee and ate pastries while Melissa caught me up on the fallout. Daniel's family was in chaos. His parents were fighting about whether to support him financially. His sister had unfriended him on all social media. Jeffrey had told him he was no longer welcome at family events. Victoria had been fired from her part-time job at a boutique after the owner saw the photos circulating online. Apparently, someone at the party had taken pictures of the projector screen and posted them with detailed commentary. "You're trending on local Twitter," Melissa said. "There's a whole thread calling you the Queen of Receipts. That's horrifying. That's justice." She finished her coffee. "For what it's worth, I never liked him. He always seemed like he was performing being in love rather than actually feeling it." "Why didn't you say something? Would you have listened?" I thought about that. 2 years ago, a year ago, even 6 months ago. Would I have believed anyone who told me Daniel was using me? Probably not. I'd been so invested in the relationship, in the future we'd planned together, that any criticism would have seemed like jealousy or misunderstanding. "No," I admitted. "I wouldn't have." "Exactly. So I kept my mouth shut and hoped I was wrong." She squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry, I wasn't." After Melissa left, I spent the afternoon preparing for Monday's meeting with the lawyers. I organised evidence into folders: financial documents, text messages, photos, security footage, witness statements from people who'd seen Daniel and Victoria together. The file was comprehensive, damning, irrefutable. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Victoria's mum. I wanted to apologise for my daughter's behaviour. What she did was unforgivable. I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted you to know that we raised her better than this, and we're heartbroken by her choices." I stared at the message for a long moment, then replied, "Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate it." What else was there to say? Victoria's mother was a casualty of this too, forced to confront the fact that her daughter had betrayed a friend. No parent wanted to believe their child was capable of that kind of cruelty. Sunday evening, I made a list of everything I wanted from the apartment I'd shared with Daniel. The furniture could stay, most of it had been purchased jointly, and I had no emotional attachment to couches and tables. But there were personal items I wanted: books, photographs from before Daniel, clothes, my grandmother's jewellery box, kitchen equipment I'd inherited from my aunt. I'd hired movers for Tuesday, giving Daniel the weekend to clear out his things. If he hadn't removed everything by then, it wasn't my problem. The lease was mine, and I'd already given notice to the landlord. In 2 months, that chapter of my life would be completely closed. Monday morning arrived with the weight of finality. I dressed carefully, a navy suit, minimal jewellery, hair pulled back in a professional bun. The law office was downtown in a glass tower that overlooked the river. I'd been there once before for the consultation, but today felt different. Today we were moving forward with actual legal action. The lawyer, Catherine Barnes, betrayals, was exactly as I remembered, sharp-eyed, direct, no nonsense. She shook my hand and gestured to a chair. "I've reviewed everything you sent. The case is strong. We're looking at fraud, breach of promise if your state recognises it, potentially emotional distress. The financial recovery alone should cover the $40,000 he took, plus interest and legal fees." "What about Victoria?" I asked. "Trickier. She didn't steal from you directly, but if we can prove she participated in the scheme, and your text messages suggest she did, we can include her in the suit. She'd be jointly liable for damages." I thought about that. Victoria had less money than Daniel, came from a family with fewer resources. Suing her would be financially devastating, but it would also be just. She'd known exactly what she was doing, had participated willingly, had benefited from the deception. "Include her," I said. Catherine nodded, approvingly. "Good. People need to face consequences for their choices." We spent 2 hours going through every detail, building a timeline, identifying potential witnesses, discussing strategy. By the time I left the office, I felt exhausted, but oddly energized. The wheels of justice were slow, but they were turning. My phone rang as I walked back to my car. Emma Richardson, my boss. "Amelia, how are you holding up?" "I'm managing. Thank you for checking in." "Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up. Daniel called the office this morning asking for you. I told him you were unavailable and that all future communications should go through legal channels. He got aggressive, started saying you'd ruined his life, and demanding to speak with HR. My stomach tightened. What did HR say? That your personal life is none of our concern, and that if he contacts the office again, we'll consider it harassment. Emma paused. I also wanted you to know the promotion is yours. The committee made their final decision last week. You were the unanimous choice. I was planning to tell you at the party, but obviously that didn't happen. The promotion. The position I'd worked toward for 3 years. The reason I'd stayed late and skipped vacations and pushed myself past exhaustion. It felt distant now, less important than it had seemed a week ago. But it was still mine. I'd earned it. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. You start in the new role next month. Take the time you need until then. We've got you covered. Tuesday, the movers arrived at the old apartment at 8 a.m. Daniel had removed most of his things, clothes, electronics, some furniture his parents had given us, but he'd left chaos behind. Drawers hanging open, trash on the counters, a passive-aggressive note taped to the bathroom mirror that said, "Hope you're happy now." I crumpled the note and threw it away. Happiness was irrelevant. What mattered was freedom, autonomy, the absence of deception. Whether that translated to happiness was a question for future me to answer. The movers packed everything I'd marked. Boxes of books, kitchen supplies, my grandmother's jewellery box carefully wrapped in bubble wrap, photographs from childhood, artwork I'd collected over the years. The apartment looked emptier with each passing hour, stripped of personality and warmth. By noon, it was just walls and floors and the ghosts of shared meals and lazy mornings to awnings and fights that had seemed important at the time, but were meaningless now. I did a final walkthrough, checking closets and cabinets. In the back of the linen closet, I found a box I didn't recognise. Inside were letters, dozens of them, handwritten, addressed to Victoria from Daniel. I opened one at random. My love, she'll be at that conference until Friday. Come over Thursday night and stay. I want to fall asleep with you in my arms for once. In the bed we'll share someday when this is all over. I didn't read the rest. I took the box to the movers and added it to the evidence pile. More ammunition for the lawsuit. More proof that this had been deliberate and ongoing and planned. The apartment keys went into an envelope addressed to the landlord. I walked out without looking back. Wednesday, I spent unpacking at the studio, creating order from the chaos of moving boxes. Each item I placed on a shelf or hung in a closet felt like a small act of reclamation. These were my things, earned with my money, chosen by my taste. No one else had a claim to them. Thursday brought the first court date, just a preliminary hearing to establish the basic facts and set a timeline. Daniel showed up with his own lawyer, a tired-looking man who seemed resigned to losing. Victoria wasn't there. According to Catherine, she had been served with papers but hadn't yet retained legal representation. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s who listened to both sides with impassive attention. When Daniel's lawyer tried to argue that the relationship's end had been mutual, she cut him off. The evidence shows systematic financial exploitation and infidelity. Unless you have documentation to the contrary, this hearing is concluded. Trial was set for 3 months away. I walked out of the courthouse feeling numb. 3 more months of this, of legal proceedings and evidence reviews and the constant reminder of what had been done to me. But then it would be over. Truly and finally over. Friday night, I met Melissa for dinner at a restaurant neither Daniel nor Victoria had ever been to. We ordered wine and pasta and talked about everything except the lawsuit. Melissa told me about her daughter's school play, about the vacation she was planning, about the mundane frustrations of her job and marriage, normal life untouched by drama, boring and beautiful in its stability. "Are you going to date again?" she asked over dessert. "Eventually, maybe. I don't know." I finished my wine. Right now, I'm just trying to figure out who I am without him. I spent 4 years defining myself through that relationship. I need to remember what I wanted before he became the center of everything. What did you want? I thought about that. 4 years ago, before Daniel, what had my life looked like? I'd been 28, newly promoted at work, living alone in a tiny apartment. I'd taken pottery classes on weekends, volunteered at an animal shelter, travelled to conferences just for the excuse to see new cities. I'd been content, maybe even happy, in a quiet way that didn't require validation or companionship. I wanted to matter, I said finally, to do work that meant something, to build a life I was proud of. I think I wanted that more than I wanted a relationship, but I got so caught up in the romance of it all that I forgot. "You still matter," Melissa said, "more now than before probably. You stood up for yourself. You refused to be a victim. That takes courage." I didn't feel courageous. I felt tired and sad and vaguely hopeful, like someone recovering from a long illness. But maybe that was enough for now. The weeks blurred together after that. Work consumed most of my energy. The new position came with increased responsibility and longer hours. But I welcomed the distraction. I threw myself into projects, volunteered for assignments, stayed late to prove I deserved the promotion. My colleagues were kind, without being intrusive, offering support but respecting my privacy. The lawsuit progressed slowly. Daniel and Victoria both attempted to settle out of court, offering partial restitution in exchange for dropping the case. Catherine advised against it. "They're hoping you will accept less to avoid the trial. Don't. We have them dead to rights. See it through." So I did. I showed up to every hearing, provided every requested document, maintained my composure even when Daniel's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive or unstable. The evidence was overwhelming. The text messages, the photos, the security footage, the financial records, it all painted a clear picture of deliberate, systematic betrayal. 3 months after the engagement party, the trial began. It lasted 2 days. Daniel took the stand and claimed everything had been a misunderstanding, that he'd loved me and made mistakes but never intended to hurt me. Victoria cried and said she'd been manipulated, that Daniel had pursued her relentlessly until she'd given in. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found in my favour on every count: fraud, breach of promise, emotional distress. The settlement was even larger than projected, $78,000 plus legal fees, to be paid jointly by Daniel and Victoria. I felt nothing when the verdict was read. No triumph, no vindication, just a hollow sense of completion. It was done. They'd been held accountable. Justice, such as it was, had been served. Outside the courthouse, Catherine shook my hand. "You did well. Most people would have crumbled under that kind of scrutiny. You stayed strong." "I didn't have a choice," I said. "Everyone has a choice. You chose dignity over revenge, truth over comfort. That matters." I drove back to the studio, though I'd started thinking of it as home, and sat in the quiet for a long time. The settlement money would arrive within 30 days. I'd already decided what to do with it: pay off my student loans, invest in retirement accounts, donate a portion to organisations supporting domestic abuse survivors. Not because my situation was equivalent to theirs, but because I understood now how easy it was to lose yourself in a relationship, to miss the warning signs until it was too late. 6 months after that night at the engagement party, I was having coffee with a colleague when she asked if I'd ever consider dating again. "I am dating," I said, surprising myself. "Nothing serious, just meeting people, seeing what's out there." It was true. I'd joined a few apps, gone on a handful of dates. Most had been forgettable, but a few had been genuinely pleasant. I wasn't looking for a relationship, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but I was open to possibilities. That felt like progress. "Good for you," my colleague said. "You deserve happiness." I thought about that word, happiness, and what it meant now. It wasn't the giddy joy of new romance or the comfortable contentment of long partnership. It was something quieter and more durable. The satisfaction of work well done, the pleasure of my own company, the knowledge that I could survive betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. I'd lost a fiancé and a best friend. I'd lost the future I'd planned and the version of myself who'd believed in their innocence. But I'd gained something too: clarity, independence, the unshakable certainty that I would never again ignore my instincts or tolerate behaviour that diminished me. The scars would always be there, but they were proof I'd survived, that I'd fought back, that I'd refused to let betrayal define me. And that, I was learning, was its own kind of victory. A year after the engagement party, I deleted the last photos from my phone. Not the evidence, which I kept for legal reasons, but the candid shots of happier times, dinners and vacations and lazy Sunday mornings. The memories weren't all bad, but they belonged to someone I no longer was, and I didn't need them anymore. I was 33 years old. I had a career I loved, friends who valued me, family who supported me. I had a small apartment that was entirely mine, decorated to my taste, filled with things that brought me joy. I had plans for the future that didn't depend on anyone else's cooperation or approval. And I had the knowledge, hard-won and painful, but true, that I was strong enough to start over, that I could face the worst kind of betrayal and not only survive but rebuild, that I didn't need anyone to complete me because I was already whole. The story could have ended differently. I could have confronted them privately, given them chances to explain, tried to salvage the relationships through forgiveness and therapy. Some people might have called that the mature choice, the merciful response. But mercy, I'd learned, had to be balanced with justice. And sometimes the most merciful thing you could do for yourself was to walk away with your dignity intact, to refuse to be diminished by someone else's moral failure, to stand up in front of everyone who mattered and say, "This is what happened, this is what they did, and I will not pretend otherwise." That night at the engagement party, when I'd connected my phone to the projector without warning or explanation, I'd made a choice. Not out of anger or revenge, but out of self-respect. I'd chosen truth over comfort, exposure over quiet suffering. I'd chosen myself, and in the end, that was the only choice that mattered.